She sat alone at the mating ceremony until a giant alpha said, "Act like you're mine." Alara sat at the edge of the grand hall, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and her eyes fixed on the flickering torches that lined the walls. The mating ceremony was about to begin, a sacred tradition that bound nobles, warriors, and rulers to alliances of power, loyalty, and sometimes love. And yet, for all its importance, Alara felt like a stranger in a hall full of eyes. Noblewomen draped in shimmering fabrics whispered behind their fans, their laughter soft but sharp enough to sting. Men in embroidered tunics exchanged glances that were equal parts curiosity and judgment. Alara had no intention of mingling. She was different, always had been. Quiet, observant, a mind that wandered where others' hearts could not follow. And so, she remained alone, seated in the shadowed corner, her presence like a question the others could not answer. Her gaze swept the room, noting the subtle rituals, the courtiers presenting themselves with practiced smiles, the nobles bowing and curtsying to one another, the careful exchanges of words that were meant to charm and impress. Every movement felt orchestrated, like the strings of a finely tuned instrument, and she could not help but feel detached. The weight of expectation pressed against her chest, yet there was a strange comfort in her isolation. Then, as if the world itself had shifted, he arrived. Kalen. Even before she saw him, she felt the change in the air. The torches seemed to flicker more brightly, shadows stretched taller, and the low hum of whispered voices faltered. He was enormous, far taller than any man she had ever seen, with broad shoulders that seemed to carve space from the very walls of the hall. His hair was dark as midnight, falling in waves around a face both handsome and severe, marked by scars that told stories she could not yet read. But it was his eyes that struck her most, a piercing silver that seemed to see not the surface, but the very soul beneath. Kalen walked with the steady, controlled power of one who commanded attention without asking for it. The room grew quieter as he approached the center of the hall, his boots echoing against the stone floors. The whispers stopped entirely when his gaze landed on Alara. It was a look that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch, though she could not explain why. The silence was absolute, the kind that fills the space before something monumental occurs. And then Kalen spoke, his voice low but carrying across the hall deep as rolling thunder. "Act like you're mine." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made the hall seem smaller, the air heavier. Every eye turned toward her. She felt their judgment, their curiosity, but also a strange, unnameable thrill. For the first time, she was not invisible. She was noticed. And yet it was not praise, not admiration. It was acclaim, and the audacity of it stung. Alara's heart beat furiously. Her mind screamed with questions. Who was this man? What right did he have to speak to her this way? But even as reason demanded she ignore him, something deeper stirred. A pulse of connection, strange and unbidden, like a thread being tugged toward him across the crowded hall. Slowly, carefully, she rose, every movement measured, deliberate. Her dress, dark and flowing, brushed the stone as she walked, a whisper of silk that carried her presence through the hall. She met Kalen's gaze, and in that instant the world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of them. She did not speak. Words felt meaningless in the face of the magnetism that pulled between them. Kalen's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, the kind that promised danger and protection all at once. The nobles around them shifted uneasily, sensing that something was changing, though none could name it. Kalen stepped closer, closing the distance with silent power. He stopped a mere foot away, and for the first time, Alara felt the weight of his presence fully, not as a man towering above her, but as a force of nature, impossible to resist and impossible to ignore. "You have a choice," he said, voice like steel wrapped in warmth. "But you will not pretend. You will not hide, act like you are mine, or leave. The hall will notice either way." Alara swallowed, the edges of fear and defiance curling together in her chest. She had always been proud, independent, unafraid of solitude. Yet now, faced with him, she felt a trembling curiosity she could not name. For reasons she did not understand, the thought of standing with him, of accepting, even temporarily, the claim he placed upon her, felt compelling, dangerous, necessary. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his command. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried her defiance and her willingness in equal measure. Kalen's smile deepened, just enough to reveal a sharp edge beneath the warmth. The ceremony continued around them, but their connection carved out a space of silence, a bubble where nothing else existed. Courtiers danced, exchanged gifts, and made promises that would bind them to others. Yet Alara and Kalen stood still, caught in a tension that was both electric and fragile. As the evening wore on, Kalen spoke little, observing her with those silver eyes that seemed to read every flicker of thought across her face. When he finally extended a hand, it was not a gesture of dominance but of invitation. Alara hesitated for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The moment her skin brushed against his, a warmth surged through her, like sunlight through a winter sky. The hall seemed to blur at the edges, the sounds of music and chatter fading into a distant hum. She felt herself drawn forward, not just by the command he had given, but by a magnetic pull she could not resist. Kalen's hand was steady, grounding, yet there was a thrill in knowing that she was stepping into a world she had never entered before, a world of power, mystery, and unspoken promises. The ceremony's final rites began, and the king's voice boomed across the hall, speaking of bonds, loyalty, and the sacred duty of the mating ceremony. But for Alara, the words were background noise. She only felt Kalen's presence, the strength of his hand, and the quiet thrill of the unknown that stretched before her. When the ceremony ended, the nobles applauded and exchanged congratulations. Many glanced at her with curiosity, some with envy and a few with fear. But Alara's eyes never left Kalen. He gave her a look that was not possessive in the way the hall feared, but rather protective, commanding, and entirely intimate. It was a look that promised trials, adventure, and perhaps even understanding. As they left the hall together, the torches casting long shadows behind them, Alara could not help but feel a stirring in her chest, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and longing. The night outside was cold, the sky a swirl of silver clouds and mist, but she did not feel alone. For the first time, someone else was walking beside her who seemed to understand the quiet storm inside her heart. Kalen did not speak as they walked. His silence was not empty. It was filled with intention, with the weight of someone who measured every word. She realized that she was learning to measure herself against him as well, that her heart and mind were already stretching to match the presence he commanded so effortlessly. Finally, at the gates of the fortress where Kalen would reside, he turned to her. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, softened for just a moment, revealing a flicker of something almost vulnerable beneath the mask of authority. "You will learn," he said simply, "that to survive in my world you must not only act like mine but feel it." Alara's breath caught. The words were a promise, a challenge, and a warning all at once. She did not know what awaited her within the walls of his fortress, or what she would discover about herself in the days to come. But she knew one thing with a certainty that shook her to her core. The night had changed everything. And as Kalen turned and stepped into the shadows, she realized that she would follow him anywhere. Not because she was commanded to, but because the pull between them was more than choice. It was destiny. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying the scent of smoke, rain, and something ancient, almost alive. Alara looked at the path ahead, feeling the stirrings of fear and courage in equal measure. The mating ceremony was only the beginning. The real journey, the one that would test her heart, her mind, and her soul, was just beginning. And in the darkness, Kalen's presence lingered like a shadow she could not escape, and did not want to. The fortress loomed before Alara like a black mountain carved from ice and stone. Its towers scraped the sky, shrouded in mist and clouds that never seemed to pass. The path to its gates was lined with jagged rocks and twisted trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. A chill wind swept through the air, carrying the scent of snow, iron, and something ancient, almost alive. Alara shivered, though not from cold alone. She felt the weight of the journey behind her, the strange pull that had led her to Kaelin after the ceremony. Every step closer to his fortress was a step into the unknown, and yet she did not turn back. Something inside her, a mix of curiosity, defiance, and a growing awareness of Kaelin's presence, compelled her to move forward. When they entered the gates, the guards bowed and fell silent, their eyes filled with respect and fear. Kaelin walked ahead with the ease of one born to command, his boots echoing against the stone floors of the vast hall. Alara followed, her own footsteps quiet but deliberate, her heart thundering in her chest. She had never seen a place like this. The walls were carved from black stone, etched with runes that seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. Shadows clung to the corners, shifting as if they were alive. "You will stay here," Kaelin said finally, turning to face her. His silver eyes met hers with intensity. "You are under my protection. No one may harm you, but you are not free to wander without reason. Understand?" Alara nodded, the words "I understand" catching slightly in her throat. She had always been independent, but now, under Kaelin's command, she felt the strange tension of obedience and curiosity intertwined. She did not fully understand him, nor the pull she felt toward him, but she knew that defiance and caution would be her greatest tools here. "Good," Kaelin replied. "You will dine with me tonight. There are matters to discuss." The fortress was vast and labyrinthine. Alara's senses were assaulted by the smell of smoke and firewood, the echo of distant footsteps, and the quiet hum of strange, magical energy that seemed to seep from the very walls. Everywhere she looked, there were signs of Kaelin's authority, banners with symbols she did not recognize, halls lined with armor, and statues of beasts that seemed half legend, half reality. As they walked, Kaelin spoke little. His silence was not empty, it was deliberate. Every so often his eyes flicked toward her, assessing, questioning, testing. Alara felt exposed under his gaze, but also strangely safe. There was a strength in him that promised protection, even as it warned of consequences for missteps. Finally, they arrived in a large chamber with a long table. Torches cast flickering light across the room, highlighting the intricate carvings of warriors and beasts along the walls. Kaelin gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly as she lowered herself into the chair. "You must understand," Kaelin began, his voice low and commanding, "that this fortress is not like other places. The world beyond these walls is dangerous, filled with people who would see me fall and you along with me. You are here because of fate, but also because of choice. Every action has weight. Every decision matters." Alara listened, her mind racing. She had expected a strict, cold master, a man of power who demanded obedience without explanation. But Kaelin's words carried something more. They carried understanding, a recognition of the danger she faced and the role she could play. "What happens if I make a mistake?" she asked softly, surprising even herself. Kaelin's eyes softened for a moment, though the edge of command never left his voice. "You will learn. That is all anyone can promise. But know this, mistakes are not failures if you face them with courage. Courage is the only currency that matters here." Alara nodded again, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. Courage. She had lived her life carefully, balancing on the edge of expectation and independence. But here, under Kaelin's watchful eyes, she felt a different kind of courage awakening, a courage that demanded she step beyond her comfort, beyond her fears. The meal was quiet, filled with the clinking of utensils and the soft crackle of the fire. Kaelin observed her, speaking only when necessary, asking questions that revealed little but tested her mind and spirit. She answered as honestly as she could, finding that the more she spoke, the more she felt a strange bond forming between them. It was not love, not yet, but something like understanding, a recognition of each other's strength and solitude. After the meal, Kalen stood and walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the silver light of the moon. "There are things you must know," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made her heart tighten. "I am not free. I have carried a curse for many years. A bond cannot form with me without consequence. You must understand that if you choose to remain, if you choose to act as mine, the path will be dangerous. Not just for me, but for you." Alara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle into her bones. She had expected challenges, but the idea of a curse added a layer of complexity she had not imagined. And yet, the fear that should have made her hesitate was tempered by curiosity. She wanted to understand him, to know the man behind the power, the curse, the command. "I understand," she said softly. "I will not pretend, but I want to know why." Kalen's eyes met hers, silver shining in the torchlight. "Because I cannot let anyone near me without danger, because I have failed before. Because I cannot risk what I feel, even if it is already too late." The words hung between them, a fragile bridge of truth and emotion. Alara felt a stir in her chest, fear mixed with longing, caution with fascination. She had never met anyone like Kalen. The intensity of his presence, the power that radiated from him, and the glimpse of vulnerability beneath it all were intoxicating. The next days passed in a rhythm that was both exhausting and intoxicating. Kalen taught her the ways of the fortress, the rules that governed his people, and the dangers that lurked beyond the walls. He was patient but firm, commanding yet understanding. Each lesson carried weight, each command was a test, and each glance from him seemed to pull her closer into a world she did not fully understand but could not resist. At night, when the fortress was quiet and shadows danced across the walls, Kalen would speak of the curse, of the past battles and losses that had shaped him. Alara listened, absorbing every word, feeling the thread of connection between them grow stronger. She began to understand that his command, "Act like you're mine," was not merely a statement of possession, but an invitation to trust, to step into a bond that could be both dangerous and transformative. One night, as a storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the fortress in jagged flashes, Kalen approached her chamber. He did not knock. The door was already open, as if he had known she would be awake. "You saved a servant today," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on hers. "You acted without thinking of yourself. That is courage, and it is dangerous." Alara felt her heart beat faster, the intensity of his gaze like a flame. "I could not stand by," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear and thrill that coursed through her. "I would not forgive myself if I did nothing." Kalen studied her, the stormlight flickering across his features. For a moment, he seemed less like an impenetrable giant and more like a man burdened by solitude and responsibility. "You are reckless," he said softly, almost as a confession, "and yet I think I may need you." The words struck her with a force she did not expect. She had not sought this bond, this connection, yet she felt it taking root in her heart. She wanted to understand him, to stand by him, to see the world through his eyes, and perhaps to help him see the world through hers. As the storm raged outside, lightning flashing through the windows, Alara realized that the journey ahead would be perilous. The fortress, the curse, and the weight of Kaelin's world would test her courage and her heart in ways she could not yet imagine. And yet, she did not hesitate. She would face whatever came next, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because the pull between them had become impossible to deny. And in that silent, storm-lit room, Kaelin's presence lingered, a constant reminder of the danger and the promise, the command and the connection, the power and the vulnerability that bound them together. The night ended with no resolution, only the quiet understanding that their bond had begun, fragile and untested, yet unbreakable in its potential. Alara lay awake, listening to the rain on the stone roof, thinking of the man who had claimed her attention with a single command. And in the dark, she realized that the mating ceremony had been only the beginning. The real trials, the real bonds, and the real discoveries were yet to come. The fortress was alive with shadows, whispers, and secrets, but Alara was no longer afraid. She had stepped into Kaelin's world, and in doing so, had taken her first step toward courage, trust, and perhaps something far greater than she had ever imagined. And in the distance, the storm raged on, carrying with it the promise of danger, of discovery, and of a bond that would shape both their fates. The forests surrounding Kaelin's fortress were unlike any Alara had ever seen. Twisted trees with dark, glimmering bark loomed high, their branches like the arms of unseen watchers. Mist hovered low over the ground, curling around her boots with a strange, whispering sound. The air smelled of wet earth, magic, and something ancient that seemed to hum under her skin. Kaelin walked ahead of her, tall and unyielding, his silver eyes scanning the shadows as though expecting danger at any moment. His presence was a constant anchor, steady and powerful, yet she could feel the tension coiled around him like a spring ready to snap. "Stay close," he said without looking back. "The forest is alive, and not all of it welcomes strangers." Alara nodded, pulling her cloak tighter around her. She had been with him for days now, learning the ways of the fortress, training with the guards, and navigating the strict hierarchy of the northern clans. Every day had been a test, not of her strength alone, but of her courage, her mind, and her ability to trust Kaelin, whose world was dangerous and often unforgiving. They had ventured into the forest in search of the source of Kaelin's curse, a dark power that had haunted him for years, keeping him from forming true bonds, and leaving a shadow over his life that even his strength could not entirely defeat. "This curse," Alara said softly, breaking the tense silence. "Why did no one ever tell me what it is?" Kaelin's jaw tightened. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, pain perhaps, or fear, behind his silver eyes. "Because it is not a story for those who do not understand the cost. The curse is older than the fortress, older than the clans. It binds me, tests me, and threatens all who come near. It is not to be trifled with." Alara swallowed. She had expected danger, but hearing the truth in his voice made it real in a way that no lesson or warning could. "And me?" she asked, almost whispering. "Am I in danger?" Kaelin turned his gaze on her, sharp and steady. "You are. And yet I do not want to leave you out of this. You chose to follow me. You chose to act as mine, even knowing the risk. That matters. That changes everything." Alara's heart pounded at his words. She had followed him out of curiosity, courage, and perhaps something stronger she did not yet name. But now, faced with the reality of the curse, she wondered if she had made the right choice, or if her choice had bound her to a danger she could not escape. The forest grew darker as they went deeper, the mist thickening and carrying with it strange whispers, soft and almost melodic. Alara shivered, not just from the cold, but from the feeling that the trees themselves were watching, waiting. Kaelin's hand brushed against hers briefly as they navigated a narrow path between twisted roots, a silent reassurance that even here, she was not alone. Hours passed as they searched for signs of the curse's origin. Strange carvings on trees, glowing faintly in the dim light, hinted at rituals long forgotten. Stones etched with runes pulsed faintly, as if alive with a power that had waited centuries for someone to awaken it. Kaelin moved with precision, his knowledge of the forest and its dangers evident in every careful step. Yet there was tension in his posture, a silent warning that even he did not fully trust what lay ahead. Suddenly the mist thickened into a wall, and a shadow moved within it, a dark, writhing shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The shadow hissed, and the temperature dropped sharply, causing frost to form on the edges of the trees. Kalen stepped in front of her instantly, his hand on the hilt of a blade she had never seen before, its edge gleaming with runes that pulsed like fire. "Do not move," he commanded, his voice low and steady, a calm within the storm. The shadow surged forward, and Kalen's blade met it with a strike that sent sparks of energy into the mist. Alara watched in awe and fear as he fought, not just with strength, but with a control and precision that made her pulse race. The shadow hissed and recoiled, writhing against the force of the magic embedded in Kalen's weapon. "Stay behind me," he shouted, his silver eyes locked on hers for a fleeting moment. "Do not let fear control you." Alara nodded, her hands gripping the hilt of her cloak. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the moment demanded focus. She realized with a thrill that mingled with terror that she was learning what it meant to trust someone completely, not because she had no choice, but because she wanted to. The battle lasted what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Kalen moved with a grace and power that seemed almost impossible, every strike and parry precise and controlled. The shadow, sensing its defeat, retreated into the mist with a final, echoing hiss that carried through the trees like a warning. Alara's legs shook as she stepped forward, her eyes wide with both fear and admiration. "Kalen, what was that?" she whispered. He sheathed his blade and turned to her, his expression unreadable but softer than before. "That," he said slowly, "was a fragment of the curse. It is tied to me and it tests anyone who dares come close. You are stronger than you know, but do not underestimate it." Alara's chest tightened. She had followed him, faced the forest, and watched him confront a force far beyond her understanding, and yet she did not regret it. Something in her stirred, a mix of respect, fascination, and the beginnings of a bond she could not yet name. As they continued their journey, Kalen began to speak more openly of the curse. He told her of the bond it demanded, of the danger it brought to those who tried to draw close, and of the loneliness it had forced upon him for years. Each word revealed a piece of him she had not known, a man who carried strength and vulnerability in equal measure. "You see," he said one evening as they rested beside a fire in a clearing, "the curse is not just a force of darkness. It is a mirror. It shows you what you fear, what you desire, and tests whether you are worthy of what you seek. Many have failed before you. Many have turned away." Alara listened, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. She felt the weight of his words, but also the pull of something deeper. She had chosen to follow him, to act as his, and now she understood that choice carried meaning beyond the ceremony. It was a declaration of courage, trust, and perhaps something more. "Kalen," she said softly, "if I stay, if I act as yours, will it really help you? Will it break the curse?" He looked at her, his eyes glimmering in the firelight, and for a moment the mask of the alpha fell away, revealing the man beneath. "It may," he said quietly, "or it may make things worse, but you are not like the others, I feel it. You see me, not just the power, not just the curse, but me, and that may be the only thing that can change this." Alara felt a tremor of fear and hope ripple through her. She did not fully understand the curse, nor the danger that lay ahead. But she did understand Kalen in a way that surprised her, his strength, his loneliness, his need for connection. And she realized that she did not want to turn away. The following days tested them further. They discovered runes carved into ancient stones, remnants of rituals meant to bind or break the curse. They faced trials that required both cunning and courage, pushing Alara to confront fears she had long hidden. And through it all, Kalen was there, commanding, protective, and yet in moments almost tender in the way he guided her, taught her, and trusted her with fragments of his true self. One night, as the moon rose high and the forest was bathed in silver light, they came to a clearing where the curse's power was strongest. The runes on the stones glowed, pulsing in rhythm with a force that seemed alive, ancient, and waiting. Kalen stepped forward, placing his hand on one of the stones. "This is it," he said, voice low. "If we succeed, the curse may weaken. If we fail, it will strike back and neither of us may survive." Alara stepped beside him, her hand brushing his. She felt the heat of his presence, the quiet strength that had become her anchor. "Then we will succeed," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "We face it together." Kalen's silver eyes softened for just a moment, and he gave the slightest nod. "Together," he agreed. The curse awakened. Shadows erupted from the stones, twisting and writhing, reaching for them with silent menace. Kalen drew his blade, and Alara gripped her cloak tightly, feeling a surge of courage she had not known she possessed. They faced the darkness, not as master and subject, but as partners, bound by choice, trust, and the fragile beginnings of something far stronger than fear. And in that moment, under the silver moon and the whispering trees, Alara realized that her journey had only just begun. The curse was powerful, ancient, and terrifying, but so was the bond forming between them. And it was a bond worth every risk, every fear, every step into the unknown. The storm had passed, leaving the forest dripping with silver light from the rising moon. The air was crisp, almost electric, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Alara and Kalen stood at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the northern sea, the waves crashing against jagged rocks far below. The fortress behind them seemed small and distant now, a reminder of all that had been tested, all that had been risked. Alara's cloak whipped around her in the wind, and she shivered, not from cold but from the weight of the moment. The curse had grown stronger in the days since their encounter in the forest clearing, its shadow reaching further, testing the limits of both their courage and their trust. And yet, she had never felt more certain of her place by Kalen's side. "You feel it too," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the waves. "The curse, it's awake, stronger than ever." Kalen's silver eyes scanned the horizon, his expression tense. "Yes," he admitted, "it knows what is at stake. It knows we are here and it will fight to keep its hold. But we are not weak. We have faced it together before and we will face it again." Alara looked at him, her heart tightening. She had seen the strength and vulnerability behind his command, and she knew that beneath his armor of authority and power was a man who carried pain, responsibility, and an unyielding desire to protect those he cared for. She wanted to be more than a witness to his battles. She wanted to stand with him, as equal, as partner, as someone he could trust fully. Kalen stepped closer, the wind tugging at his dark hair and cloak. "Alara," he said, his voice steady but low, "the curse is not just a force outside of us. It is a reflection of fear, doubt, and loss. To defeat it, we must face it not with blades alone, but with courage, choice, and heart." She nodded, gripping the edge of her cloak. "Then we face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." The ground beneath them began to tremble as shadows emerged from the cliff edges, swirling like dark smoke. The curse was awakening fully now, its power stretching across the rocks, across the sea, across the night. Shapes formed from the darkness, tendrils of shadow that reached for them, cold and alive. Kalen drew his blade, the runes along its edge glowing like molten silver. Alara stood beside him, her hands empty but her courage as sharp as any weapon. "Stay close," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Trust me and do not falter." Alara swallowed, fear prickling at the edges of her heart, but she did not step back. She had made her choice and she would not waver now. Together, they faced the first wave of shadows, the tendrils curling and lashing toward them with a force that threatened to pull them into the darkness. Kalen moved with precision, every strike of his blade cutting through the shadows with power and control. The silver glow of the runes lit the night, illuminating the fearsome forms that sought to engulf them. Alara's heart pounded, but she found strength in his presence, in the silent assurance that he would protect her, but also that she had the power to act, to resist, to face the danger alongside him. "Now," Kalen shouted, and together they stepped forward, their bond a tangible force against the shadows. Alara raised her hands not with a weapon, but with intent. She had learned from Kaelin, from the forest, from the curse itself, that strength was not only physical, it was courage, clarity, and choice. She focused on the threads of shadow that sought to entangle them, and with a surge of determination, she pushed back. The tendrils recoiled, hissing and twisting, unable to pierce the bond forming between them. The battle raged, the night alive with silver light, shadow, and the power of two hearts united in purpose. Kaelin fought beside her, protecting her, but also guiding her in subtle ways, through gestures, through shared understanding, through trust. And Alara realized that in facing the curse together, they were no longer master and follower, alpha and subordinate. They were partners, equals in courage and determination. As the climax of the curse approached, a shadow larger than the rest emerged, coalescing into a form both terrifying and majestic. Its eyes glowed with a dark light, its voice a whisper in her mind that carried every fear she had ever held. "Turn back. Leave him. You cannot survive." Alara faltered for a heartbeat, but Kaelin's hand found hers, strong and steady. "Do not listen," he whispered. "You are stronger than this. Trust yourself. Trust us." She drew a deep breath, feeling the bond between them strengthen, and took a step forward. The shadow recoiled at the defiance in her heart, as if it had not expected choice to be a weapon against it. With Kaelin by her side, she pushed further, focusing on courage, trust, and the connection that had grown between them. The shadow shrieked, a sound like the tearing of the world itself, and then began to crack, splintering under the force of their united will. Kaelin struck with his blade, and Alara's courage surged, striking at the heart of the darkness with everything she had. In that moment, the curse shattered. The shadows dissolved into mist, the wind carried them away, and the night was left still, save for the pounding of their hearts. The cliff, the forest, and the sea were quiet once more, and the first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, bathing the world in soft gold and silver light. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated, her hand still clasped in Kaelin's. He knelt beside her, his chest rising and falling steadily, his silver eyes soft but intense. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it together." She looked at him, breathless and shaking, and saw not just the alpha, not just the warrior, but the man who had carried so much pain and solitude, now unburdened, if only slightly, by the bond they had forged. We faced it," she whispered, "and we survived." Kaelin reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just enough to make her heart race. "Not just survived," he said softly. "We were stronger than it together. That is what matters. That is what changes everything." The sunrise painted the sky in hues of orange, pink, and silver. The sea shimmered, reflecting the light, and the forest beyond the cliff seemed to breathe, alive with renewed energy. Alara felt a deep, quiet joy, a sense of peace she had not known before. The curse that had shadowed Kaelin's life and now theirs was broken, or at least weakened, and they had faced it not as master and follower, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and choice. Kaelin rose, offering her his hand. She took it, and together they stood, side by side, facing the dawn. The wind tugged at their cloaks, the waves crashed below, and the world seemed to stretch infinitely before them, full of possibilities, full of life, full of promise. "Kaelin," she said, her voice steady now, full of emotion and resolve, "whatever comes next, we face it together. Not because of duty, not because of command, but because we choose to." He smiled, the silver in his eyes catching the first rays of the sun. "And that, Alara, is what makes us free." The fortress behind them awaited, filled with the life, politics, and challenges of the northern clans. But the journey forward, whatever it held, felt lighter, brighter, because they had proven something together. That courage, trust, and heart could overcome even the darkest of curses. That choice mattered. That connection, fragile, untested, yet powerful, was theirs to nurture and protect. Alara took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on her face, and looked at Kaelin. "I will not run," she said. "I will not hide. I am yours, if you still want me by your side." Kalen's expression softened, a rare tenderness breaking through his imposing presence. He stepped closer, closing the space between them, and lowered his hand to hers. "You chose me," he said quietly, his voice carrying every weight and promise. "And that made me free. I do not need to command you anymore. You are mine because you chose it, and that changes everything." Alara smiled, tears of relief and joy welling in her eyes. "Then we begin together," she said softly. Kalen nodded, his eyes reflecting the sunrise, the strength, and the promise of what lay ahead. And together they turned back toward the fortress, toward the life and challenges that awaited, confident in their bond, their courage, and the choice they had made. The curse had tested them. Shadows had threatened them. And yet through fear, trial, and danger, they had emerged stronger, unbroken, and united, not by command alone, but by heart, courage, and choice. And in that quiet dawn, as the wind carried the scent of the sea and the forest, Alara realized that she had found more than safety, more than understanding, more than courage. She had found a bond that would shape her life forever. The journey had been perilous. The nights had been long, but now, as she walked beside Kalen toward a new day, she understood something deeply and undeniably. Love, trust, and courage could break even the darkest curse, and the world full of shadow and light awaited them, together.